Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, where we're delving into some of the arcane topics where those who seek to undo everything this country was founded on seem to swim around saying, oh, but it's free speech, Joe, and you certainly wouldn't be afraid of that, and you wouldn't want any sort of hearings on un-American activities, would you? And so with that in mind, one of the greats is Hayden Ludwig from the Capital Research Center, and he's got an incredible series that I would like to see turned into something for Netflix, quite honestly. And I think it would work almost as well as the Roman Empire series based on Cassius Dio's writings. But as the senior investigative research with the Capital Research Center, Zuckbucks, the origins of. Hayden, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. It's always good to be with you. And
what a weekend it can be when you can mention Cassius Dio in a radio program. It's probably not been done ever. So we'll see what happens.
This audience is very highbrow.
That's right. They're all going to Wikipedia. Who's that? So anyway, whether or not this ever gets turned into a Netflix miniseries or not, this piece that you've done is just so illuminative that draws all the lines back from Mark Zuckerberg's investment, in air quotes, in the election process long before that, because he didn't just invent this idea, though he'd probably want you to think he did. When did you start seeing these strings attached all the way back to, right around 2006, 2007?
That's right. Yeah. So your listeners will be familiar with the Zuckbucks scheme, which, let me just lay it out quickly, was $350 million from Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, a known partisan and leftist, through this little-known Chicago nonprofit called the Center for Tech and Civic Life, CTCL for short. He gave all that money to county election offices in the 2020 election, ostensibly to help people vote during COVID-19. Really, though, the facts show that it was to turn out Democrats in key battleground states. Well, we started reporting on that well over 2 years ago, December 2020. And since then, we've been looking forward to what CTCL will do next, but also trying to dig into CTCL's roots. And it turns out CTCL is actually the evolution of a group that came right before it. That group is called the New Organizing Institute. And the three people who founded CTCL all came from this institute. And this, back in the day, no longer exists. But the group back in the day, say 2015 or so, was called by the Washington Post the left's Hogwarts for digital wizardry, or the left's Death Star, because it was known for training Democrats.
Oh, yeah.
So we're seeing where the Zuckbucks scheme got its start, and it's very ugly.
I remember the 2008 presidential cycle, and even before that, the primary cycle. And I would I marveled at it. I would show them to Republicans and say, look at this. It would appear to me that Barack Obama himself has emailed me. And I know for a fact that didn't happen. But how many of the people who have received this email know that Barack Obama didn't sit down and type out this email? And they shook their heads saying, I don't know. But that seems like this was all that stuff that they were doing. And it was the marvel of being able to do this kind of outreach using digital platforms to pay pennies on the dollar to what it used to cost.
Well, that's right. And what we found so far, it's a little bit difficult because NOI doesn't exist anymore. But we found that this institute was both training those professional campaign activists, but also that it was advising larger fundraisers and foundations and Democratic strategists on how to actually change the American electorate. So we found incredible documents going back at least a decade where they're talking about investing $100 to $200 million per election cycle in order to totally transform America's voters. Because and they're very stark about this. They believe the electorate as it stands is too conservative, actually too white. They want more non-white voters, more recent immigrant voters. They're very explicit about all of this. And the reason, of course, is because Democrats, probably mistakenly, believe that their victories always hinge on having very high turnout and very high turnout among non-white voters. Now, I don't think that's true. Perhaps it was more a decade ago. Nevertheless, they have this bottomless well to pour into this campaign. Now, why does this matter? Because these are the people who now run the Zuckbucks scheme that we were told is nonpartisan, not about helping Democrats or Republicans. It's just about helping voters do their civic duty. Well, apparently not, because the group that you were working for before was explicit about electing Democrats. And I'm looking at some of these quotes here. They want to totally transform the country, rewrite our history. This is very far left, quote unquote, progressive activism at its worst. And this is where all of the Zuckerbucks scheme comes from.
It is, and I was reading your piece, and I found myself feeling, and maybe I just view things with a different eye, but some of the most racist things I've read, just the presumption that Latino voters are going to vote for Democrats because they're about entitlements and these aid programs, and I think it's blown up, like you mentioned, where in some cases the Latinos have become some of the most arch conservatives because I should say the Latino citizens. Because they came here and did it their own way and started their own businesses, and that paradigm has blown up. But Hayden, I'm looking at this stuff, and I can't help but think this is all during Obama term 1, and then by Obama term 2, doesn't the Attorney General himself say, I'm stepping down from this role to take a voter integrity role, to get out there and help register more voters and get more people involved? And are these connections tenuous, or am I not just seeing the shadow?
Right, exactly. Well, you're speaking about Eric Holder, the Attorney General held in contempt of Congress during the Obama administration. And now Holder, who's an attorney, of course, he now runs the Democrats' largest it does voter registration, but its main thing is suing Republican states to try and redraw their boundaries every 10 years. This happens after the census. We just went through this redistricting phase. So his organization basically attempts to push it in a partisan direction to help the Democrats as opposed to being neutral or helping the Republicans. And it is very explicitly partisan. But what you're identifying is this massive get-out-the-vote machine, and it relies on a steady influx of money from mostly tax-exempt groups, big foundations. A lot of the dark money stuff we've spoken about, such as Arabella Advisors' big $1.6 billion dark money network. Well, the whole thing is a way to pump money into these professional activists who exist to identify where do we have likely voters who are not yet on the voter rolls in key battleground states, places they want to flip, like we're talking North Carolina, Texas, Arizona. How do we get them on the voter rolls? Well, we need professional nonprofit groups, tax-exempt groups, with this endless wave of funding in order to put these people on the rolls, and then we got to drive them to the polls, get them there, get them to vote. And they've identified how much it costs per person. They've even estimated that, by 2025, we'll have the whole country blanketed in these people. It's really sinister the way they want to transform this country while talking about, well, we just want people to do the right thing and get out to vote and exercise their American civic duty. Well, the facts say otherwise.
Well, and certainly, and there's a map that's included in one of your pieces, Hayden, that just shows their own estimates on how much each investment would turn into vote changes, and all through the borderlands of Texas and New Mexico and Nevada and California, places where they're adding, and they're also playing Karl Rove's game, and Karl Rove, bless his little heart, probably should have kept his mouth shut about the 2 or 3 counties are all you really need to do to win, the Electoral College, because that's kind of what the Zuckbucks went for, is they went into districts that were going to vote Democrat anyway, like Philadelphia, and super saturated them, got the turnout way up. So, but nobody would have noticed, okay, Joe Biden carried Philadelphia. Okay, oops. But the numbers threw off the rest of the states, so that the state's electoral votes went to President Biden instead of Donald Trump.
That's dead on. Yeah. What we're learning is the Zuckbucks scheme that happened in 2020 was not born in a vacuum, right? This was something that they had planned for. Now, I believe that when COVID came along, they saw that as cover to implement, let's say, a massive vote by mail component to all of this. But the bottom line is they still had funding and this infrastructure in place to cause that to happen. And you're dead on. Sometimes I speak with people and they go, well, how can you really get millions of people in the vote? How do you do all that? Well, that's not really what it is. If you look at the 2020 results, we're talking maybe, let's say, a few tens of thousands, maybe 60,000 voters across 5 or 6 states, depending on how you're looking at it. Well, those 60,000 voters don't have to be spread thin across the state. You mentioned Philadelphia, one place that got basically doubled its elections budget from this Zuckbucks infusion in 2020. Well, all they had to do to turn out Democratic voters is to target Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. If you simply drove up turnout in those 2 jurisdictions, you could win the entire state of Pennsylvania. Same thing in Arizona. Maricopa County has something like 60% of the entire population of the state of Arizona. Well, if you pour all of your money into turning out new voters, well, registering them and turning them out too, in just that county, you're probably going to win the entire state of Arizona. So if you look at how tight these races were, we're not talking about millions. We're talking about a few tens of thousands that can make the difference between, an electoral victory and defeat of, dozens of electoral votes. It's very, very clever. And as long as you have the money, the capital to do this, and they do, you can really get smart with it.
Is 2021 an outlier? Folks didn't realize how possible it was that Terry McAuliffe could snatch defeat from the jaws of victory the way he did. Because in Virginia, we have that red crescent or sickle, depending on how you want to visualize it, from Northern Virginia on through Richmond down through Hampton Roads that normally is just straight Democratic voters. But Glenn Youngkin made big gains in those areas. But I feel like it was just because these folks hadn't realized that they needed to get that big turnout in Hampton Roads. And with 2024 coming, we have a Senate race plus the presidential race in Virginia, and certainly more important, the Senate race. They'll be back, it seems like. Is that an unfair feeling on my part?
Well, I suspect you're right. I was here in 2021 in Virginia as well, and I suspect they didn't realize that I think they missed the ball in 2021 in the governor's race, but I don't think they're going to miss it again in the 2023 state Senate race. I think they're paying close enough attention to this stuff. And well, look, we're already seeing this. We're talking about Zuckbucks past, but what's going on with CTCL right now is just as important, right? What CTCL is engaged in right now is a new Zuckbucks 2.0 scheme, where here's what they're doing. They're taking $80 million from a set of unknown donors. We still don't know who provided all of that. And they're turning to counties and key states like DeKalb County in Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And they're offering millions of dollars as a credit to these places as a kind of membership fee. So, hey, you want to come join our little alliance here? Well, we'll pay your membership fee for you. And guess what? Now you can go and get free services from all of our alliance allies. Well, who are those allies? They're groups that provide consulting and policy services on drop boxes, on vote by mail, on opposing voter ID requirements. It goes on and on and on. And the whole point of this is to gain undue influence in how our county elections are run. And remember, even though the states do all of the election work, the tallying up and everything, the elections are really run at the county level, which is why the left is trying to thrust themselves into that process to try and rewrite the policies down there. Very mundane, boring stuff, but it has massive ramifications. And they're offering $80 million in these battleground states to do that. Now, what concerns me is Virginia has a ban on private funding of elections. We were the first state in the union to have a bipartisan ban. The Democratic Senate, the Republican House, all voted unanimously to ban this last year in April. Well, now Democrats are coming forward in the Senate proposing to repeal the Zuckbucks ban. And there's a specific clause in this bill. This is SB 1180. Look it up. There's a specific clause that would allow for training of election administrators in the state of Virginia by private organizations. Well, gee, I wonder who they could be speaking about right here. So this is an ongoing battle.
Hayden, let's take it to that level, because I think that was sort of the implication of George Soros's very inexpensive flipping of all these county Commonwealth's attorneys here in Virginia, prosecutors in other states, because even if you were to say some hinky things went on, you've got a prosecutor saying, well, I don't think there's enough of this there, and just parroting what James Comey said about Hillary Clinton. No reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case.
Yes, no kidding. Well, I mean, look, we've seen over the last few decades just this concentrated assault on Virginia, and that just goes with all the population shifts in Northern Virginia that's gone on. But you can see this beyond our state. You're seeing it in Georgia right now. You're seeing it in Arizona. And this whole process is not a coincidence, and it's much more than just people naturally moving to where they want to move
Right.
to. That's just a part of it. If you go back to 2005, right after the George W. Bush won re-election, 2004, major Democratic strategists and funders, Soros among them, came together and said, how are we going to stop this from happening again, these defeats? And they created a set of organizations. The biggest one is called the Democracy Alliance. Mm-hmm. And their whole goal was to concentrate strategy and spending on a set of groups in the states to try and flip them. Well, their first target was Colorado. I mean, you remember when Colorado was a bright red, crimson Republican state. No longer. And you can thank the Democracy Alliance. They've since expanded east, and they're looking at major southern states like Georgia and Virginia to try and flip them. So no coincidence going on there.
Well, and let's go to this the origin story, because one part about this new organizing initiative, and it broke up in 2015, much like a rock band breaks up. Everyone walked out except like the small leadership group that you mentioned is now, has reformed a different band. But there was a lot of concern. What can be made in the tea leaves of this, that perhaps these new leaderships, and one of them was Obama's data guy that had been the chair when everyone left, even to the point of groups like BuzzFeed having a story on him. What's his name, Ethan Rader, driving all these activists out. And it seems to me that they didn't like the direction he was going, which was, okay, instead of just getting out likely voters, let's change unlikely voters into likely voters. And it seemed like just watching a mass exodus, that seems to be what I'm seeing in this story.
I think you're right. It's always hard to tell the inner workings of these organizations, but there was this mass implosion that seemed to happen, and the groups scattered in different directions. The guy you're speaking of, Rader, he ended up going straight into a Democratic get-out-the-vote group called Majority Forward. Well, the three future founders of CTCL, I think they took the other direction. I think they wised up to, hey, it's really great to have the Washington Post calling us the Death Star of the left, but that automatically makes us sound like, we might be left-wing or something. So when they founded CTCL, you notice the language changes from the New Organizing Institute language on these websites. Instead of talking about progressivism and saving America, transforming our people or whatever, now it's all nonpartisan, good government, civic duty stuff. The reason I think they did that was no coincidence. I think they were trying to insinuate themselves into the inner workings of elections. Now, if you look inside your local elections department at your county, right, or the state department of elections, these people, they're involved in politics, but they're not really political. They're there to just facilitate the boring everyday counting of ballots and things like that. Well, it used to be boring anyway. Yeah,
make sure all the paperwork squares up and the pencils out.
Exactly. Very mundane stuff. Well, I think they get scared off pretty easily if they detect a whiff of partisanship, Democratic or Republican, either way, for the most part. So I think if you can approach them with this nonpartisan, nonprofit good government mystique, you can really gain some influence there. And I think they've done a good job. I mean, I just remember reading all of the stuff CTCL said about itself with the Zuckbucks scheme in 2020. And it's amazing how the media went right along with, no, they're just trying to help people vote. It's just about saving people from COVID. Well, of course, that's what they say they're doing, but the facts I mean, look, when I looked at all of these 9 battleground states, Virginia included, and I looked at where the $350 million flowed to, what I found is on a per capita basis, that means per person in every county that got Zuckbucks, Biden counties got massively more than Trump counties. So it's not just that they went to cities where there are more people. That's true. It's that in those cities, those blue cities, per person, it was vastly higher in a blue county than in a red county. And I asked myself, well, gee, if this is what nonpartisan strategy looks like, what would a partisan strategy look like, right? If I was trying to elect Biden and I was these guys, I'd be doing the same thing they're doing right now. Well, that got no scrutiny in the press. It got no scrutiny in the local elections offices, and I think it's because they learned from the New Organizing Institute what not to do.
Last one for you, Hayden, and this is more kind of abstract. I did the same thing to Hans von Spakovsky just before, so it's fair is fair. It seems like, and I brought up Karl Rove because he was famous on TV saying, oh, you just got to win these 2 or 3 counties, and we know which counties there are, and we just got to get the turn up there. If we win these counties, we win the election. And it was right after that this group gets started as I read your piece. Because they're like, well, we can't let this happen again. They heard what the conservatives were doing, so they did it. Conservatives are very hardcore about, early voting, drop boxes, all these other things. Do we need to, as conservative constitutionalists, say, if this is what the laws provide for, we better get good at doing them too?
Yeah, you know what? It's a great question, and I battle back and forth in my head all the time. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think that the conservative movement is going to adopt these things en masse and get better at them than the left is. We saw this a decade ago with the digital strategy. You mentioned this earlier with the Obama campaign. When Obama ran for president in 2008, his digital strategy, that's emails, that's YouTube ads, that's all sorts of things targeting the young, likely Democratic voters, was way better than anything the McCain campaign or the Republican National Committee had seen ever, right? Mm-hmm. Well, 8 years later, Trump ran a better one than Hillary did, right? It takes time for these sides to battle with each other and get smart about that. What I'm sensing right now is there's such an emphasis on grassroots election integrity in our state, in every state I've spoken with, that they can't get away with the stuff in the shadows like they used to be. It's going to be much, much harder every election cycle.
Yeah.
The other thing I've noticed is Republicans are figuring out how they can turn this stuff that the Democrats pioneered against the Democrats. And I think it's only a matter of time. Maybe 2024, maybe it's 2028, but I think eventually the right's going to catch up to the left and beat them at their own game. And it's not going to be before then that we see real election integrity victories, I mean, the kind that save the republic. So maybe what Republicans need to tell themselves is we adopt this ugly thing right now so that we win, and when we win, we get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know. I leave that to the smarter strategists.
Hayden Ludwig, capitalresearch.org. Thank you so much for your insight, and these pieces are terrific. And if I was doing a film production, I'd be turning him into a mini-series right now.
You're too kind.
Good stuff. And thank you. I appreciate it, and you have a wonderful weekend.
You as well, my friend. Thank you.
And thank you for listening this week. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.